there, art weirdos. Welcome back. Today I want to talk about my first love, my artistic raison d'etre, printmaking. So what is printmaking? I feel like not a ton of people understand it when I'm out at festivals and whatnot. The Met has a really good definition on their website. Printmaking is an artistic process based on the principle of transferring images from a matrix onto another surface. One of my favorite printmaking quotes, I think, also is a pretty good definition of printmaking. George Bodmer, I found this floating on the internet. Printmaking is fun because it takes a perfectly simple process like drawing and makes it as complicated and error-prone as possible. He's not wrong. That's pretty much what it is. So what is printmaking not? When we are talking about printmaking, we are not talking about printing things off of the computer. Reproduction print is a completely different process. So broadly, there are 5 types of printmaking, and then there are specific techniques inside of each type. We've got Intaglio, relief, screen print lithography, and monotype. First up is Intaglio, and the first type in Intaglio is etching. Rembrandt is really big on this. Etching is basically taking a metal plate, usually zinc or copper, and putting an acid-resistant ground on it, scratching that ground to expose some of the metal, and then dipping it in an acid bath in order to create recesses in the metal. Later, these recesses will be filled with ink, and you'll be printing it on a press. Etching does require a press. So what you're seeing here is I don't have an etching setup right now. My press is in storage. I have an old dingy copper plate that you'll see in a little bit. But the way that I was taught to do etching is that you print it in states. So you put the acid-resistant ground on, you scratch the image, you put it in the acid bath, you clean the whole thing, you ink it up, you press it, and you see what you have. This is a really goofy-ass picture of my sister. These are the various states. These are actually states 2 through 5. And then what I believe is the final, also in the Intaglio category, is engraving. Albrecht Dürer, what's considered his master work, are all of his engravings. Engraving is similarly done on a metal plate that you see down there. You have several tools. That's actually an etching needle. You would use that primarily for etching, but it can also be used for engraving. The burnisher is this curved metal piece that is good for filling back in areas if you want to erase your work, so to speak. And then there's the mezzotint rocker. Mezzotint is almost another subset of Intaglio, where what you do is you take that rocker, has a really fine edge. It's like a bunch of little serrated knives, and you rock it on the plate. You're creating a ton of tiny little pinpoint recesses, and importantly, you're creating burrs in the copper, little bits of hooked copper that will hold the ink. A properly rocked mezzotint plate that's fully inked will print pure black and a velvety, a little bit texturally, like velvet texturally black. Then you take the burnisher and you can smooth it back out. So there's also another traditional engraving tool. I don't know what it's called. I've just always heard it called an engraver. It's like a triangular piece of metal with a handle. I don't have one of those. Dry point was not my jam. So next up we have relief. Relief covers various carving techniques. So if Intaglio is making recesses to put the ink into, relief is carving out recesses to have the absence of ink. This is your woodcuts and your lino cuts and your collagraphs. You're just making a surface to roll ink onto. In the lino cut and woodcut sense, you're making holes, recesses in the image for the absence of ink. I've got a little piece of birchwood here. I don't have any linoleum, although the 2 images that I showed you in the beginning here were, the first one was a woodcut, the second one was a lino cut. You can use, for woodcut, really any piece of wood. I was taught on MDF, but it's not necessarily the most natural wood substance in the world. Later on, I was taught that birch is a really good one. This is a birch slice. Birch is okay. I'm a big fan of pine. The Cinderella woodcut example that I showed was done on pine wood. It was wonderfully soft and just so easy to work with. So there's different ways of approaching multicolored woodcuts. You can carve away your lightest color and print it, and then carve away your next lightest and print it. That's a very European Western way to approach it. So you're actually, it's very ephemeral. You're actually destroying the block as you go. The Japanese way is that each color gets its own block. So if you have a 5-color woodcut, then you have 5 different blocks that you're carving out to achieve your final image and then printing. It's a lot more reproducible. You can have open editions that way. Traditional Western woodcut where you destroy the block as you go requires limited editions by its nature. I was taught to soak my paper always for every printmaking technique. I, through my own experimentations in college, discovered that that's not always necessarily what's best for the way I work. I don't believe you have to soak your paper, but you can see the difference there between a woodcut that is soaked paper and not soaked. The paper will take on more ink. So Collagraph is a totally new process to me. In my undergrad transfer, the person that was teaching printmaking was not a printmaker. They were not very knowledgeable. They tried to teach me Collagraph and it didn't work. I took to the internet, YouTube actually. I found a couple of different demonstration tutorials. Belinda Del Pesco has a demo of what she calls a collagraph, but it really to me just looks like an etching done with matte board and medium instead of metal. I've never seen a collagraph described like that before. I've never just seen that process described as collagraph. So then I went to Snake Artist. That was not a tutorial. That was just a demo. Didn't really explain much of how he got to where he was. And then I found Lois DeWitt, and she had an excellent tutorial on what I was taught was a collagraph. I was taught that a collagraph was gluing things to a board, inking that board up, and then printing it as if it was a relief. Now, the reason why I did not find that very attractive in college is that the person who was trying to teach me what a collagraph was using these really like big things, like thick things on top of a board and having like very drastically different surface heights and depths of recessions. And what I got from Lois's tutorial is that you actually need very shallow differences in the depths. Like you need to have flatter things. So I actually I didn't hate this. I've always kind of, no, I don't want to say looked down, but I guess I did look down on collagraph. Like it's not real printmaking. That's something that hobbyists do, but this was pretty cool. Especially later when we talk about combining different print processes, this was really cool. Kind of didn't expect all that texture from the corrugated cardboard, so that was cool. I was literally just taking the junkiest things I could find around the house because I didn't want to put a ton of effort into this for something that I've never liked and never thought I would do again, but I would do this again. This was a lot of fun. And I think this is a really good and quick, probably the cheapest introduction to printmaking, honestly, because all you really need to get started with calligraphy is ink and a brayer and something to press with like a Barin. That's it. And then, dead things to glue onto cardboard. So next is screen printing. This is basically a stencil method, and there's a couple of ways you can approach screen printing. You need a mesh screen. You stretch it across something. Most screens are stretched across something more akin to painting stretcher bars. For this quick and easy drawing and blocking demo, I just stretch it in an embroidery hoop. Drawing and blocking fluid is a more painterly method of screen printing, but it doesn't, in my experience, produce very long-lasting screens, because the drawing fluid and the blocking fluid are both water and soap soluble. They don't tend to last very long or hold up very long to repeated printings. So the drawing fluid is this blue fluid. You just, like you said, you draw it on, you paint it onto your screen, and after it dries, you want a nice, really super thick layer. The thicker the better. I tend to have to go over it 2 or 3 times when I've tried this method. Paint it on there, and then you will go and flood the entire screen with the blocking fluid, rinse off the drawing, and you've got your stencil. The nice thing about drawing fluid, you can see I got those drips. You can get some new cool painterly effects like that. The other alternative is you can just take the blocking fluid directly and paint that on and do a negative painting, leaving your image there, and your stencil's done a lot quicker. You do lose out on some of the painterly techniques, the drips and the what have you that you can get with blocking fluid, with drying fluid, but you do have a much quicker stencil. I'm not a big fan of this method, in part because it doesn't last very long, and in part because it's messy, it's frustrating. It is the most error-prone printing process I have tried. When I screen print, my jam is photo emulsion techniques. Almost a type of photography. You can use transparencies and pigment-based pens to create your own photo negatives, essentially. Then you're gonna go and coat the screen, a properly stretched screen, with a photosensitive emulsion and expose it to a UV light, and then you'll have this stencil. So you lay your paper or fabric underneath it. I just use plastic knives to spread my ink onto my stencil. You have a squeegee. Flood your screen with a very light pressure and then press hard, and you've got your print. When you print on fabric, like a t-shirt, get yourself some newspaper. So straighten up your shirt, all those wrinkles will print. Line yourself up, flood your screen, and then you're gonna print hard, and you have a custom-made t-shirt with your little cat eyes and moons. So now we're gonna move on to my jam, my love, lithography. So lithography is based on the resistance of oil and water. In traditional stone lithography, you take these pieces of limestone that come from a quarry in Bulgaria, and it's like empty now, so, you know, running out of litho stones. You take this very finely ground down soft limestone and you draw on it with some type of grease-based medium. I've got litho crayons and touche here. You just draw your image, or paint it in the case of the touche, onto the stone. After you've etched the stone with a mixture of acid and gum arabic, then a wet stone will be able to take on ink only where you've applied your greasy medium, and you can print from there. You can see my bias based on how much lithography footage there is versus the other print mediums. So the thing I love about stone lithography is that there's so many ways to get your image down. You can actually transfer a toner-based print, like from a photocopier, with acetone onto your stone, and I've gotten them to print before. It's kind of amazing. You can also just use that as a transfer method to think of it as like your initial sketch. You can transfer sketches with charcoal onto there. You get these wonderful lace-like patterns with touche. If you use it, you can do wet on wet, you can do wet on dry. It's a really, really versatile medium. Now, traditionally, stone lithography is printed on a special type of press. It's a different type of press than you'd use from relief or etching. I don't have the space for such a giant old press, so I actually have developed hand printing, and I'm sure all the lithographers are screaming right now. A professor of mine from college, who I'm still good friends with, also is incredulous anytime the topic of me hand printing or using muriatic acid comes up. But it is actually possible with both dry paper, wet paper, fabric to hand print. And I'm certainly never going to get those very, very delicate images that you can get with a press printed stone, but you know, it works for my purposes, and it's a lot better than having to drop $10,000 on a lithopress and find a place to put a 5-ton press in my very small apartment that I share with a husband, 2 children, and a dog. Wow, I shot so much lithography footage, but I just love it. Now, another form of lithography, there's a few different forms. There's pronto plate and there's zinc plate lithography, but one that I think goes underrated, one that I find extremely underrated, is Xerox Lithography. This has a lot of different names, photocopier litho and gum transfer, and the confusing thing is that all of those names can also mean other processes. So when you're talking about photocopy lithography, that can describe what I'm doing here, or that can describe something that's done entirely with a photocopier. But it's the same idea. Sticking with lithography is based on the resistance of oil and water. You take just gum arabic and water solution, saturate your photograph. It has to be a toner-based photocopy. It cannot be an inkjet. It cannot be anything else. It must be toner-based. And then that will, when soaked with a gum arabic water solution, that will resist the water and the gum arabic, and you can ink it up. It's a very delicate process. Part of the ripping that I'm getting during printing here is that I have used too stiff an ink. I wasn't thinking. I was in the printing zone because I was printing everything at the same time. I actually recommend oil paint because the looser viscosity will help you get a much more delicate roll onto the photocopy. So about this time, I was thinking, I have that big black space on my colograph. Let's mix and match. And this right here is why I love printmaking, because the different processes can work together, and they can work together absolutely beautifully. So inking up my gum transfer, inking up my colograph plate, and then combining the two and getting a print that I'm actually really proud of. I really enjoy this as an image. I love the way that these two methods combine. And so that leaves us with Monotype. Monotype's not usually considered one of the main forms of printmaking, but frankly, I don't understand why. This is the most painterly form of printmaking. I love to do this as part of my cleanup. In college, monotyping was a major aspect of my cleanup routine. So two main forms of monotyping are additive and subtractive, and they're just as if you were describing that for drawing. Additive is taking a brush or something like that and putting the paint or ink down onto the glass, and then you're just going to press paper to it and have a monotype. Alternatively, you can wipe the ink away. And that was always my main monotyping method, was the subtractive method. Eugene Carrière was the grand master god of subtractive monotyping. He got some of the most beautiful tones and the most beautiful images. Subtractive is super easy. You just take a cloth, Q-tips, paintbrush. I'm not using the best paintbrush here for the method, and you just wipe away the ink. You can go back on top of it. You can do a subtractive and additive combination. You can get beautiful tones and very haunting images. When I see a really good subtractive monotype, of which this is not an example, I think of Victorian spirit photography. It's very, very ghostly and very delicate tones that you can get there. So I hope this was informative. I hope you have a little bit better understanding of what printmaking is now. I know this was throwing a ton of information. It's a huge topic. If anybody's interested in seeing a more in-depth tutorial or demonstration on any of these techniques, let me know, because that is something I would totally be down for. Till then, have a great day and go art something.